On a crisp autumn evening, I decided to explore Millbrook Farm, an old abandoned estate on the outskirts of town. Known for its eerie history and tales of hauntings, the farm's dilapidated grandeur intrigued me. With the sun setting and a cool breeze rustling through the overgrown fields, I parked my car and approached the property. The estate's large house was a shadow of its former self, with broken windows, a sagging roof, and ivy creeping up its sides. The surrounding fields were wild and unkempt, adding to the air of neglect and mystery. Ignoring the rusted "No Trespassing" sign, I ventured inside with a flashlight. The front door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty foyer. Dust particles danced in the weak light from my flashlight, and the silence was occasionally broken by the house's groans. Exploring the ground floor, I saw faded wallpaper, broken furniture, and an old grandfather clock that had stopped ticking long ago. Despite the eerie ambience, I pressed on, drawn by a sense of curiosity. As I climbed the steep, creaky stairs, the temperature seemed to drop abruptly. At the top, a long hallway stretched before me, lined with closed doors. One door was slightly ajar, leading to a dimly lit room. Inside, an old ornate mirror stood against the wall. Its surface was grimy but still reflective. Approaching the mirror, I felt a sudden chill. The mirror's surface began to ripple, and my reflection twisted unnaturally. I noticed a shadowy figure standing in the doorway behind me. The figure was indistinct, its features obscured, but it was unmistakably there. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My heart raced as I turned back to the mirror, but the figure had vanished, leaving me with only my own pale, frightened reflection. Determined to uncover more, I continued my search and found a dusty journal in one of the bedrooms. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but readable. The journal belonged to Eleanor Millbrook, who had lived in the house decades earlier. Her entries described strange occurrences, unexplained noises, shadows moving on their own, and a growing sense of dread. Eleanor wrote about a dark presence that seemed to grow stronger over time. The last entry detailed a final encounter with this entity, leaving her feeling constantly watched. As I read, the temperature dropped even further, and mournful cries echoed through the walls. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see the shadowy figure in the doorway once more. This time it was closer, more defined. Panicking, I grabbed the journal and fled downstairs, the sound of footsteps echoing behind me. The house seemed to close in, its walls pulsating with an unnatural energy. Outside, I looked back at the house. The windows glowed with a faint, eerie light, and the shadowy figure was visible in an upstairs window, watching me. I started my car and drove away quickly, my heart pounding. The haunting presence of Millbrook Farm stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lingers in forgotten places. I had always been fond of my grandmother's house, with its sprawling garden and quaint, old-world charm. After her passing, I was left with the daunting task of sorting through her belongings. It was a bittersweet chore, filled with nostalgia and sorrow. I began with the attic, a space I hadn't ventured into in years. The attic was a time capsule filled with relics from the past, dust-covered furniture and boxes of old photographs. As I climbed the narrow, creaky stairs leading to the attic, a chill seemed to envelop me. The air was cooler and carried a musty smell. I flicked on the light, revealing a dim, flickering bulb that barely illuminated the cluttered space. I began sorting through the boxes, finding various knickknacks and family heirlooms. Among the clutter, I discovered an old ornate dollhouse. It was intricately crafted, with delicate furniture and miniature rooms that seemed to capture a bygone era. My curiosity was piqued, and I carefully lifted the dollhouse from its dusty corner. As I examined it, I noticed something unsettling. A single porcelain doll sitting in the center of the living room of the dollhouse. The doll was unlike any I had ever seen. It had a porcelain face with hollow eyes and a wide, sinister grin that seemed unnaturally permanent. Its clothes were antique, with intricate lace and embroidery that added to its unsettling appearance. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I examined the doll more closely. It seemed out of place, a relic from another time with an unsettling presence. That night, after a day of sorting through the attic, I retired to bed feeling a sense of unease that I couldn't quite place. As I tried to sleep, I heard soft, rhythmic scratching noises coming from the attic. I dismissed it as the house settling, or perhaps some animal in the eaves, but the scratching grew louder and more insistent. Unable to ignore the noises any longer, I decided to investigate. With a flashlight in hand, I climbed the stairs to the attic once more. The scratching had stopped, leaving an eerie silence that seemed to press in on me. I approached the dollhouse, which had been left on the floor amidst the boxes and furniture. As I shone the flashlight over the dollhouse, I noticed something horrifying. The doll was no longer in its original position. It had moved slightly, and its head was turned towards me. Its eyes seemed to follow my movements, and the grin seemed even more pronounced. I felt a wave of nausea and dread wash over me. Desperate to understand what was happening, I decided to investigate the dollhouse further. I carefully opened a hidden compartment in the floor of one of the rooms. Inside, I found old photographs and letters, yellowed with age and written in a trembling hand. The photographs showed a young girl, perhaps around 10 years old, with a look of sadness in her eyes. The letters told a haunting story of a child who had gone missing many years ago. The final letter was a frantic account of the girl's experiences with the doll. It described how the doll would move on its own and whisper in the night, tormenting the writer with its presence. The letter ended with a plea for help and a warning to anyone who found the doll. As I read the letter, the scratching noises started again, now accompanied by faint, mournful whispers. My heart raced as I turned towards the dollhouse, the atmosphere growing colder and more oppressive. I felt a cold draft on my neck and saw the doll's eyes glistening with an unnatural light. Terrified, I fled from the attic, slamming the door behind me and locking it tight. I spent the rest of the night in a cold sweat, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, I couldn't pack my things quickly enough. I left the house, leaving the dollhouse and its sinister occupant behind. To this day, I have never returned to my grandmother's house, and I often wonder if the dollhouse still sits in that dark attic, waiting for its next visitor. The experience remains a chilling reminder of the dark and haunting presence that can linger in the most unexpected places. It was a cold, foggy evening when I decided to spend the night alone in my family's old cabin, nestled deep within the dense woods. The cabin, a relic of simpler times, had always been a sanctuary of solitude for me. It stood isolated, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets with the wind. As I arrived, the fog wrapped around the cabin like a shroud, muffling the sounds of the forest. The only light came from the dim glow of the porch light and the occasional flicker of lightning in the distance. I quickly set up my things and settled in for the night, feeling a comforting sense of nostalgia wash over me. I lit the fireplace and curled up in my favorite armchair with a book. The crackling of the fire was soothing, and the warmth was a stark contrast to the cold, damp air outside. However, as the night wore on, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. It was as if the shadows in the room were watching me, shifting and moving in the corner of my vision. The room's only light source was the flickering lamp on the side table, its glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. I tried to focus on my book, but the shadows seemed to dance with an almost sentient malevolence. The wind howled outside, causing the windows to rattle and adding to the growing sense of unease. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint, whispering sound, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. At first I thought it was the wind or perhaps the house settling, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were calling my name, softly at first, then with increasing urgency. My heart began to race, and I set the book aside, straining to listen. The whispers seemed to come from the darkened hallway leading to the basement. I hesitated, my mind racing with possible explanations. Was it just my imagination, or was something else in the house? Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the hallway. The whispers grew louder, now clearly calling my name. The basement door, which I had always kept locked, was slightly ajar. A cold draft emanated from the opening, and I could see my breath fogging in the chilly air. With trembling hands, I pushed open the door and descended the stairs. The basement was filled with old, dusty furniture covered in white sheets. The air was icy, and the darkness seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. As I moved further into the basement, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer calling my name, but seemed to be pleading, begging for something. I scanned the room, my flashlight revealing old trunks and boxes, but nothing seemed out of place. Then I saw it, a shadow in the corner of the room. It was darker than the surrounding darkness, an almost tangible presence that seemed to move towards me. My breath caught in my throat as the shadow grew larger and more defined, taking on a humanoid shape. My flashlight flickered and then went out, plunging me into complete darkness. The whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of desperate, mournful voices. I felt a cold, clammy hand brush against my shoulder, and a voice, raspy and hollow, whispered directly into my ear, "You should not have come back." Panicked, I stumbled back up the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste. I slammed the basement door shut behind me and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, unable to shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching me from the shadows. As dawn broke, the whispers finally ceased. I packed my belongings quickly, my hands shaking as I gathered my things. I couldn't leave the cabin fast enough, and as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching me from the woods. The cabin remains abandoned to this day. I never returned, and the whispers have become a haunting memory, a chilling reminder of that foggy night when the shadows seemed to come alive. The summer I turned 18, my friends and I decided to visit the annual carnival that had come to our town. It was a lively affair with colourful tents, bright lights, and the sweet smell of cotton candy filling the air. We spent the day enjoying the rides, games and attractions, but as night fell, a certain tent caught my eye. It was an old-fashioned sideshow tent tucked away in a corner of the carnival grounds. The vibrant colours of the tent had faded, and the once exciting banners now looked worn and tattered. The sign read, "The Carnival of Shadows," which piqued my curiosity. My friends were not interested and decided to stay behind, but I felt an inexplicable pull towards the tent. As I approached, I was greeted by an elderly woman dressed in an elaborate gypsy costume. Her eyes were dark and piercing, and she had an air of mystery about her. "Step right in," she said, with a voice that seemed to echo in the night air. "Discover what the shadows have in store for you." Inside, the tent was dimly lit by flickering lanterns. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the soft strains of eerie, melancholic music. The The space was filled with strange curiosities, dusty mirrors, strange artifacts, and old photographs. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface dark and reflective. The old woman guided me to the mirror and told me that it could show me a glimpse of my future. I was skeptical, but intrigued. She asked me to stand before the mirror and close my eyes. As I did, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. When I opened my eyes, the mirror's surface seemed to ripple like water. The reflection I saw was not my own, but an image of a dark, foreboding carnival, much like the one I was in, but twisted and sinister. The colors were muted, and the rides and attractions were dilapidated. The reflection showed shadowy figures moving through the carnival, their forms shifting and merging with the darkness. I stared in horror as the reflection seemed to zoom in on a figure standing alone in the middle of the carnival. It was a girl, her face obscured by shadows. Her eyes were wide and filled with terror. The scene shifted, and I saw her running through the carnival, pursued by dark, formless shapes. Suddenly, the image in the mirror flickered and went dark. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see the old woman's face, her expression solemn. "The shadows have shown you what they wish to reveal," she said softly. "The carnival holds secrets, and some are better left undiscovered." I thanked her and quickly left the tent, feeling a growing sense of dread. As I walked away, I glanced back at the tent, which seemed to have become even more faded and tattered. My friends were waiting for me, eager to leave the carnival behind, and I joined them, eager to escape the unsettling experience. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with the images from the mirror. The next day, I learned that the carnival had packed up and left town overnight, disappearing without a trace. No one I spoke to seemed to remember the sideshow tent or the old woman. It was as if it had never existed. Years later, I still have vivid nightmares about that night. The image of the dark carnival and the girl's terrified eyes haunt me. I sometimes wonder if it was all just a trick of the mind, or if there was something more sinister lurking in the shadows of that forgotten carnival. The memory serves as a chilling reminder of how easily the line between reality and the supernatural can blur in the dark corners of our minds.